Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in less than 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. Thank you so much for listening. Today, talk of a trade war, a medical mystery, and the result of the president's meeting with Kim Kardashian West. Plus, the price to fly, a new smart speaker, and Lady Gaga's new role. All that and much more in less than 10 minutes. And hang out today after the news for 3 Question Thursday. We are talking about something that affects everyone who uses the internet. Yes, net neutrality. It's officially going away next Monday. What you need to know. I'm Erica Mandy. Today is Thursday, June 7th. You ready? Let's do this. President Trump does not seem to be backing down in trade talks, especially heading into the G7 meeting happening this weekend. G7 stands for the Group of 7 industrialized nations who meet every year. It's a time for the world's richest countries to talk shared values and trade. But this year, it will be a bit more hostile than usual. Remember, President Trump put new tariffs in place affecting Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. And they are not happy about it. All 3 are now retaliating. So that'll likely be at the top of the agenda at the meetings this weekend. The Wall Street Journal quoted Trump's top economic advisor saying the world's trade system is broken and the president is trying to fix it. But critics say, at what cost? Relations with America's closest allies are not great right now. Axios reports some analysts are calling it an open trade war at this point, which will have economic effects for everyone. The president hosted his first White House dinner for Islam's holy month of Ramadan. It's been an annual tradition since after the 9/11 attacks, a way to show the West is not at war with the Muslim religion and as outreach to Muslim Americans. The AP says President Trump chose to skip hosting the meal last year, but this year he did recognize members of the Muslim community. Ambassadors from Muslim-majority nations were there, like Saudi Arabia and Jordan. Ramadan is when Muslims around the world fast from dawn to sunset for a month. This year it lasts through June 14th. It's a mystery right now who is making U.S. diplomats sick. No one seems to know what it is or who's behind it. But it's a serious problem that seems to be spreading now. First, American diplomats in Cuba were affected by odd sounds that led to sickness and even minor brain injuries. Now the New York Times reports the same thing is happening to some American diplomats in China. U.S. officials are now looking into the possibility that China or Russia could be behind these attacks, if they're attacks at all. It started when Kim Kardashian West saw a video on social media and took up the cause of a 62-year-old woman who was sentenced to life in prison 2 decades ago. She even took it to the White House and met with President Trump about this woman's case and about prison reform overall. Well, it seemed to work. Yesterday, President Trump commuted the life sentence of Alice Marie Johnson, which doesn't completely pardon her crime, but it does mean she gets to go free. She's been in federal prison for more than 20 years for drug trafficking. The White House statement said the administration will always be tough on crime, but believes those who have paid their debt to society and worked hard to better themselves do deserve a second chance. NBC News reports Kardashian West called it the, quote, best news ever, and the woman that was let out of prison called it the greatest day of her life. The ACLU also thanked the president, but asked him to consider more similar cases. In fact, some critics are saying President Trump is only willing to go around the normal way of doing things if it's friends, family, or celebrities that are involved. All right, other things people may be talking about today. Expect airline prices to go up soon. Airline execs are now warning travelers they may have to increase ticket prices because of the rising cost of jet fuel. The Wall Street Journal reports jet fuel has gone up 50% just in the past year, and it was already airlines' biggest expense. Just this week, Delta Airlines cut its profit forecast because of it, and American Airlines did the same thing about a month ago. That said, the New York Times reports newer, more efficient planes are at least helping out with some of that extra cost. So when will it cost you more, the traveler? Experts say expect to see ticket prices go up this fall. There's a new kind of smart speaker called the Sonos Beam. Sonos announced a home theater smart speaker that works with Amazon's assistant, Alexa. TechCrunch reports it's basically a soundbar for your TV that will be an external speaker, but then also works with your voice. So you can tell it to do things like turn on the TV, change the volume, or have Alexa find you specific movies or shows, or just listen to music when the TV is off. Variety says other companies have announced plans for similar products like Roku and Google, but the Sonos Beam is the only one so far that could potentially work with different AI assistants in the future. Singer Lady Gaga and actor Bradley Cooper are coming together for a new movie called A Star is Born, and they're both taking on new roles for the first time. It's the first leading role in a movie for Lady Gaga, and it's Bradley Cooper's debut as a director. The trailer just came out yesterday. It'll actually be the third remake of the classic movie. It'll be in theaters October 5th. Country singer Carrie Underwood became the most awarded artist at the CMT Awards last night. People report she took home her 18th trophy. She won Female Video of the Year last night, and Blake Shelton took home Male Video of the Year. And that's it for the main news today, but it's now time for 3 Question Thursday, where I talk with a different expert about a different topic every Thursday. This week, we are hearing a few minutes from 2 different people who have different viewpoints about net neutrality. So why are we talking about this now? Well, starting in a few days, Monday, June 11th, that regulation is going away. No more net neutrality. The FCC chairman says the internet's success in the early years was because there was not too much regulation, and it's time to go back to that. So today we are talking to 2 experts who have different views from that and in some ways from each other. We start with Shireen Mitchell. She's the founder of Digital Sisters, which has been involved in digital policy debate since the 90s, as well as getting people in disadvantaged environments connected. She's been named one of Fast Company's most influential women in technology, a DC tech titan, and more. Hi, Shireen. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
A lot of people talk about net neutrality, but I'm not sure that everybody really understands it.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about it on this show before. I always try to give an example and a brief explanation. How do you explain it to people so that the average person understands what's going on?
What we're telling the FCC to do is to make sure that the telecom companies, that's your Verizon, that's your AT&T, that's your Comcast, that they don't get the right to decide who gets to send information to you depending on how much they are paying. What the telecoms want to do is say, well, maybe if you're using a video and there's more data that's being used, we should be able to charge you more for how much data is being flowed through that particular pipe. So Facebook would not be Facebook if they had to pay for every user that got onto Facebook when they're now at 2 billion, right? So there's a lot of data packets that's going back and forth. If they, and people are sharing pictures, videos, all kinds of things on Facebook right now. But if Facebook started off having to pay for every new video, every new photo, they would not be Facebook that they are today because they would not have been able to afford it, especially when you're a startup and you don't have money. So the same thing goes for anyone who starts their own website. Verizon is basically saying, we want to charge the Googles and the Facebooks and the YouTubes of the world more money, the Netflix of the world, right? In the midst of that, individuals get caught in that battle because the same thing, it's not going to just apply to big companies. It's going to apply to everyone.
And that obviously depends on what these internet service providers decide to do. What's really happening right now is the government is saying, we're not going to require that everything is the same. You have these options. So the net neutrality rules expire June 11th, which is coming up. What can we actually expect to happen right away? Will we notice as online consumers anything different right away?
So what they're basically saying is that they're not going to do major changes, that they get to, as the free market, decide, what they can do or not do. So we won't see things right away, although some changes have already happened. So the example is Lifeline. Now they are not required to do Lifeline. And that's a program where they were basically being required to provide discounted access to the internet for low-income communities. So when the rule passed, they got rid of those services. The access to the net is not just a simple debate about can you get to Netflix. It is a larger conversation, and what has happened with these rules being relaxed is now that we will all be beholden to whatever the telecoms decide to do.
Will this kind of open a door for something gradual, and what do you think that will look like?
That's typically what they do. They will gradually increase your prices. Because they can tell how much bandwidth you're using from your home. So if you live in a house with 5 people and they're all on a net, there's a bandwidth usage happening there. For some people, it may not be a big deal. For others, it can, because there are a lot of people now who work remotely from home. I also think that in some ways, we're going to see increases. We'll start to see increases from the services. So Netflix may start increasing their prices. Even though Facebook is technically free, we may start seeing other changes that they may be implementing because of it. And so these are things that we may not see right away, but we'll start to see some changes in terms of how people, how services are, how we are interacting with services. And I do think that they're going to try to do it gradually, so it doesn't seem like a big deal.
We've seen some states looking into passing their own net neutrality rules. Is that going to work?
There are states that are basically saying, well, we're going to put certain rules in place. And that's actually possible for them to put a state by state series of rules. Now, that gets tricky, right? Because then at that point, every company, every telecom would have to worry about what are the rules per state. Everyone should be fighting for net neutrality. That's the number one takeaway.
All right, next up, someone who says these rules are not actually that big of a deal, that they're just a drop in the bucket. Kentaro Toyama is an associate professor at University of Michigan School of Information and a fellow of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT. Before that, he worked with Microsoft Research India. Thank you so much for coming on to The Newsworthy. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
So from what I've read, you have a fairly unique perspective on this. What do you think about net neutrality rules, and are they necessary?
That's a good question. My feelings about net neutrality are that it's a small drop in the ocean of what needs to be done compared to all the other things that are not being done. I think net neutrality, as it's normally formulated, addresses such a small part of the problem that it's almost pointless to worry about it. It's sort of like using a thimble to bail out water in a sinking ship when what you really have is a huge gash in the hull.
So do you think that what the FCC is doing now and the fact that these rules are going away starting on June 11th, is that a big deal?
I ultimately don't think it's too much of a big deal. I mean, it will hurt some organizations to some degree, but it will also help others. I partly don't buy issues about it's stifling innovation necessarily. Arguably, it allows a certain kind of innovation that is not allowed under net neutrality rules. But again, there are both winners and losers. It's not clear to me that this particular rule is the one that's going to really save any major ideal on the internet.
So in your mind, these rules just don't go far enough?
That's a good question. So first of all, I don't think there's anything that is a pure notion of net neutrality to begin with, completely independent of the infrastructure of the internet as it runs today. So there are all kinds of biases in the way that the internet works already. And many of those biases are dictated by the organizations that spend the most money on actual internet infrastructure. Let's say Google could decide that they want to have a better connection to New York City and build a giant, internet pipe between its closest data center and New York City. And that would give it arguably an advantage over other rivals simply by doing so. But we have no laws against that. And arguably, that would be allowable. The problem with net neutrality is that it basically says, okay, there's a certain kind of thing you can't do if you're an internet service provider, but there are always ways around it. There are already ways around it with or without net neutrality.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about this whole issue?
I think, first of all, it's that there is such a thing as net neutrality in a kind of pure philosophical sense. It just doesn't exist. Every router online is making decisions about how to take internet packets and send them into different places. And those decisions have an inherent bias that favors some groups and not others. We can claim that net neutrality is about not interfering with them beyond what already exists. But as I said, all kinds of organizations are already tampering with the internet in many, many ways, often to their own advantage. And so unless we're fundamentally against allowing that, I think net neutrality, again, is a very small drop in a larger ocean.
And as always, I make it easy for you to read more about today's topic and our guests and all the news mentioned in today's episode. Just go to thenewsworthy.com, click episodes, and find today's date, which is June 7th. If you got value out of this, please be sure to rate and review or just share this episode with your friends. Thanks so much again for listening. The Newsworthy is ready for you by 4 in the morning Eastern Time every weekday, so we'll chat again tomorrow. Have a great day.